women in the military were less likely to become friends with each other and to bond with each other because they were worried that they would be perceived to be lesbians. Women were less likely to report sexual abuse by men because they were worried they would be accused of being lesbian. And women in the military did have sex with men more often than they wanted to. In other words, they would have sex with men just to prove that they were not lesbians. And so we had experts testify about this. One of our experts is up in this part of the world these days. One of our experts was an Air Force Academy graduate. Her job in the Air Force was to teach United States history at the Air Force Academy. That was her job. And at some point while she was teaching U.S. history, she realized she couldn't live the lie anymore and came out. And because she came out, of course, she couldn't serve in the Air Force Academy as an instructor in the United States history. We just couldn't have that. So Beth left the Air Force, and she, not being particularly well qualified to do anything, went to Yale, where she got a PhD in history and a JD degree, and she is now a professor at Hastings. These are the kinds of people we lost in our military because of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You also heard in the video something about peace versus war. And the statistical evidence we put on at the trial showed that more people were discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell in times of peace than in times of war. And there are two reasons for that. One is people have more time to worry about this when we're not at war. And the other reason is, when we're at war, we don't really care as much. And so we found, actually, an Army regulation that allowed and actually instructed commanders to send people being investigated for Don't Ask, Don't Tell violations to combat when their units were deployed abroad. They were to go with them with the instruction, we'll deal with whether he's gay or not when they get back, if they get back. So that was another very interesting feature of the evidence that we put on in the case. Yes?
When I was reading the case, I remember one especially compelling story about an officer in the Air Force who was enforcing the no-fly zone over Iraq.
Yeah, that was Mike Ullman. Yeah, these were heroes. Okay? These were exactly the kind of people that you wanted to have protecting our country. So all he wanted to do was to serve our country. I mean, some of these people hadn't come out to their families yet either, which made it, of course, doubly difficult for them to tell their families that they were A, gay, and B, being discharged. Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Do you have any expectations about the cases that will now follow on, about what will happen, what the courts will do with these, benefits cases and things like that?
Yeah, one of the things I should point out is the bill that was signed that repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell does not actually explicitly allow homosexual service. It just repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So no one quite knows what's going to happen now that it's been repealed for a week or so. So people are free to apply for enlistment or re-enlistment, but they don't know if they're going to get in. And right now, the military says it's full. We're pretty full because we're scaling back from the wars and because of budget cuts. So one of the people that's also in the video briefly, Anthony Laverty, who I hope would be able to join us today but couldn't come. He flew 61 combat missions in Iraq before he came out and was discharged. Of course, when he came out, all the people in the org said, like we didn't know, right? And we don't care, things like that. But Anthony has reapplied at the same time that he has filed a lawsuit up here in the Northern District, where he's represented pro bono by Morrison Forster, to seek reinstatement. And while his case in court for reinstatement is going on, he's applied to be reinstated, and he's been told, A, you're 10 pounds overweight. And while he was discharged, he was up here going to graduate school and accumulated a lot of student loan debt, which worries the military because they don't think he'll be able to repay it with his income as an Air Force person. And so they're worried he's subject to risk of blackmail and so forth. And he also admitted that during the time he was a civilian and not in uniform after his discharge, he one time, while in Amsterdam, experimented with marijuana. And so that's another reason why he may not be taken back into the military. So if he's not taken back, his lawsuit will continue. And so he'll have to again prove that he was illegally discharged. Yeah?
Getting back to the bill that just repeals Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it doesn't include anything about lost wages, about any sort of compensation.
No, it actually explicitly says there will be no monetary awards to anybody who was discharged previously under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Separation pay, back pay, benefits, nothing.
And there's no chance that that's going to
No,
change.
Congress isn't going to do anything about that. I mean, the bill that was passed, as you may know, was passed in a lame duck session of Congress. The new Congress has tried to scale it back, but without success. One of the arguments, which was one of the arguments we made for the Ninth Circuit about why the case isn't moot, because there is a chance that the repeal can be repealed. We also pointed out that every single one of the leading Republican candidates for president has promised to repeal the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell if they are elected. And so this could, again, quickly become law, depending on whether Harry, Romney, Michelle Bachmann, or Rick Santorum are elected. You may have heard a Republican debate last week where a gay soldier asked a question about that and was booed. And then Santorum told you to his face that he thought Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the right thing and he was insane. So, there we are. Another of the items of evidence that was briefly mentioned in the video was the evidence that we put on about people being discharged from occupations where we have critical shortages. So, you know, again, when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was enacted, it was all really, the talk was all about guys in combat, right? Foxholes, showers, and all that. But as it turned out, Don't Ask, Don't Tell resulted in the discharge of people from a variety of occupations in the military. So it included doctors, dentists, nurses, computer operators, lawyers, for crying out loud, and a lot of translators. So one of the things that was important was the fact that so many Arabic translators had been discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that there was a backlog of communications that had not been translated prior to September 11, 2001. And if they had all been translated, we might have been able to prevent 9/11. And this evidence was particularly appealing to the judge. It also led to a different point, which was, okay, so we have personnel shortages, so what do we do to make up for the shortages in personnel while we're fighting two wars? And people are being injured and people are dying. So what the Army decided to do was to lower the standards for enlistment. So the Army, first of all, started to allow people who were up to 35 years old to enlist. They allowed people to enlist who were not as physically fit as the prior requirements. I mean, they relaxed the fitness requirements so much that I could have enlisted or Eric could have enlisted. They also lowered the standards for intelligence, so you didn't have to be quite as smart to get into the Army. And then they also relaxed an existing law that says a convicted felon is not eligible to serve in our armed forces. They started a program they called the Moral Waiver Program, by which they looked at the whole person and would decide, even if you had criminal convictions, whether your whole person was satisfactory to join the military. And so under this, of course, the whole person didn't include homosexuality, but under this Moral Waiver Program, the United States Army took in 4,000 convicted felons, many of whom were convicted of serious violent crimes. And so that's what led me in the closing argument to say, Your Honor, the evidence showed that the government would rather give a convicted felon a gun than to give a gay guy a typewriter. And that's what happened.
I just wanted to say, I'm the Dean of the Law School of Peru, and I just want to thank you so much for coming. And I have to leave early, but it's been fascinating.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure to come. More questions? Please, I can't do all the time. Come on. Yeah.
So if people are able to change their statuses, you know, say registered, and in terms of pensions or anything like that, is there any, like, people from, like, how far back or retroactive would that be?
Yeah, there may be a statute of limitations on this, but the new law does not provide anything for changing discharge status for people. The military did, a week or 10 days ago, change the status of one individual who had been discharged with a less than honorable discharge in World War II. One person, and no one's quite sure why they did that, except there was some pressure by his family and the congressman in his area to do that. It may be that it's a test balloon to see what people think about it. We'll see. But otherwise, those people who were discharged with less than honorable discharge are going to have to sue or do something of that sort individually, unless we can do something with the Ninth Circuit quickly here.
So so his retroactive, like say he would have had a pension starting.
Yeah, he's 74 years old, so there's very little financial cost to the government about
Well, so he would
changing
have
his
had-
status. But I don't think he's going to get anything retroactive. Just changing his status. Yeah.
So there was a picture in the New York Times, the front page, I think the day after